Hi BookTube, welcome to a sideline video looking at book number 5 of 53 in my Read What You Own challenge. The physical novels I own, they're more or less, right, shelved in alphabetical order by author surname. When I started the challenge, I made a random decision about fiction. I thought, okay, I'm going to start at the end of the alphabet instead of the beginning. So we're talking about authors whose surnames begin with W. The plan doesn't actually get more complex than that. I mean, whether I work my way backwards through the alphabet or whether it gets hopelessly random, I really can't say. The book we're looking at today is When God Was a Rabbit by Sarah Winman, published in 2011. Okay, I did say this was a sideline video. It is. We're going to follow the structure of a book review up to a point. You're going to know exactly when the diversion takes place, so no worries there. Let's pitch this book first. Sarah Winman added an afterword to the novel in which she tells her readers that When God Was a Rabbit is not autobiographical. It wasn't really a necessary thing to say. And that's because the family that we get to know in this story, they live a life it's a little too good and also a little too tragic to be plausible. I think it was somewhere around the 100-page mark that I could feel this gap opening up. I don't mean a chasm, just mean like a fault line between what I was reading and what would qualify as credible human experience. The 2011 paperback edition is 331 pages. How did I obtain this book? Well, in 2015, a close relative passed away. She was a watcher of television. She really loved Strictly Come Dancing and the Antiques Roadshow, Homes in the Country, that kind of thing. She led a really active social life. She read a newspaper, I get most of a newspaper daily, the odd woman's magazine. But as far as I know, she never had owned a book of any kind. In fact, if I recall correctly, her idea of good interior aesthetics did not allow for bookshelves filled with books. So when I was helping to go through her things, I was really surprised to find a paperback copy of When God Was a Rabbit tucked in the magazine rack that was beside her chair in the lounge. The spine was quite worn, so I realized that she couldn't have bought it new, and none of her friends came and asked if they could collect a borrowed book. So I guessed that maybe she got it at a charity shop. There was no bookmark in it either, so the open question is whether she ever tried to read it or not. Let's do a little bit about the author. Sarah Winman was born in Essex in 1964, same as me, yeah. She began her career as an actress, starting in theatre, and then around the year 2000 was gradually adding television and film roles, but she was nursing a long-time ambition to write a novel. And in 2008, she took this course titled Exploring Fiction at a London college, and there was where she began to do work that set the foundations for When God Was a Rabbit. Obviously, the book got published in 2011 by headline. It reached number 5 in the Sunday Times bestseller list, and it was also Waterston's pick of debut novels in the same year. It was also selected for Richard and Judy's Summer Book Club. Non-UK viewers, Richard and Judy, they were television chat show hosts, not on the same scale as Oprah, but still pretty popular. When God Was a Rabbit has currently been sold in 16 different European countries, as well as US, Canada, China, Indonesia, Brazil, Korea. I think I've covered them all. Sarah Winman has written 3 additional novels, and her latest title, Still Life, came out in 2022. Let's talk about the setting. Eleanor Maud is our protagonist, and she lives in a number of places, but the most important of these is in Cornwall, and that's why these photographs that you see are all from a visit that I made to Cornwall some years back now. Now, in Cornwall, there is a house which her parents purchase after they win an amount of money that's large enough to make paid work completely unnecessary. Wonderful. And the descriptions of the property sound idyllic. It's off-road, you've got to go a long way down a leafy lane, and in the back there's a garden that goes right down to the riverside. They've got a little private jetty, and they have lots of boating excursions from there. This property, it's the hub of the story. Even though Eleanor and her brother obviously move away, set up their adult lives in London and New York, respectively, nevertheless, this property just keeps pulling them back. And it also attracts a collection of eccentric personalities who somehow get adopted as extended family. Now, the narrative voice is quite distinct. Eleanor Maud is known as Ellie. She's the younger of the two children in this family, and she tells the story. The novel divides into two parts, the first of which it begins with Ellie talking about her birth, or rather, the details that she got from her mother, obviously. That's in 1968, and part one ends at Christmas 1980 when Ellie is 12. The part one voice has all the kind of charm that you get and humor from a child being naive and lacking grace. I'm going to read this passage from page 61. This is a scene where Ellie is with her parents and they're watching her older brother play in his first school rugby match. A piercing chill had settled on our side of the pitch, and the listless sun which had graced us earlier was now playing hide and seek behind the tall towers of Council Flat that dominated the sports field and left us shivering. I tried to clap my hands together, but I could hardly move. I was wedged into a coat that Mr. Harris had bought me the week before. A totally erroneous purchase that gave benefit to no one except the shop. It was the first time I'd ever worn it, and when I'd finally squeezed into it and gasped at the true horror of its visual impact, there wasn't time to get back out of it and into the car without one of my parents purposefully breaking my arms to do so. Mr. Harris had seen it in a sale, and instead of thinking, would Eleanor Maud like this coat? Would this suit Eleanor Maud? He must have thought, that ugly thing is nearly her size, and won't she look stupid in it? It was white, with black arms and a black back, and as tight as a knee support, but less useful, and although it was keeping the cold at bay, I felt it was simply because the cold stopped as it approached me and burst into laughter rather than by any practical means. My parents were too polite, weak, to say that I didn't have to wear it. All they could say was the gesture was kind and better weather would be here soon. I said I could be dead by then. The whistle blew, and the ball was kicked into the air. My brother ran towards it, head high, never taking his eye off it as he descended, watching, instinctively veering around obstacle players, surprisingly fast, and then the jump. He hovered as he gathered the ball and then offset it with a simple flick of his wrists to the man inside. My brother had my mother's hands. He made that ball talk. I cheered and thought that I'd raised my arms in the air, but I hadn't. They were still stiffly by my side, ghost arms of a paralyzed person. "Come on, Blues!" shouted my mother. "Come on, Blues!" I screamed, making her jump, making her say shh. My brother raced down the line, ball tucked neatly under his arm. 30 yards, 20 yards, dummy to his left. "Come on, Joe!" I screamed. "Go, Joe! Go, Joe!" A tap to his ankle. He didn't fall, no one with him still. 15 yards, and he's looking around for support. The goal line in sight, and then, out of nowhere, rearing from the mud, a 5-headed human wall. He hit it at speed, and bone and gristle and teeth collided and bedded down with him into the blood and mud. Bodies fell on top of him, toppling from both sides until the supporters and the pitch fell silent. The sun slowly reappeared from behind the tower and illuminated the sculpture of human rubble under which my brother lay. I looked up at my parents. My mother had turned around, unable to watch, her hands shaking. My father clapped and shouted loudly, "Well done, boy! Well done!" An unusual response to a possible broken neck. It was obvious I was the only one to sense any danger, and so I dashed onto the pitch. I had only got halfway towards him when someone shouted, "Pick up a penguin!" I stopped and looked around. People were laughing at me. Even my parents were laughing at me. The referee pulled off the battered players until there, crumpled at the bottom, lay my brother, motionless, half embedded in the mud. I tried to bend towards him, but was hindered by my straitjacket, and in one momentous effort I lost my balance and fell onto him and winded him, the force of which propelled him into a sitting position. "Hello," I said. "Are you all right?" He looked at me strangely, not recognizing me. "It's me, Ellie," I said, waving my hand in front of his face. "Joe," I said again, and instinctively slapped him across the cheek. "Ow," he said. "What did you do that for?" "I saw someone do it on the telly." "Why are you dressed as a penguin?" he said. "To make you laugh," I said. And he laughed. So really distinctive and really quite humorous voice there. Now, part two skips ahead 15 years to 1995. And during this time, Ellie changes, and so does her voice. Adulthood seems to rob her of all her really humorous observations. She becomes more earnest and reflective. She has a job, but she doesn't say much about it. And she doesn't seem to grow her own social circle. She just sticks with the people that she already knows. Does this novel fit a genre label? The New York Times review that was written the year that When God Was a Rabbit came out, it said, and I'm quoting now, "The misfortunes heaped on the characters are outsized and seemingly never-ending. Job, in comparison, may have gotten off easy." The reviewer decided that they would categorize the book as darkly comic. Now, let's show you the Goodreads ratings, because this is interesting. Goodreads ratings show that 62% of readers gave the novel 4 or 5 stars, but over a third gave 3 stars or less. Now, this is where the sideline part of this video kind of kicks in. I'm not surprised by the mixed reaction. I found it really difficult to work out what Sarah Winman wanted readers to take from this novel, how they were meant to regard it. In genre terms. The circumstances of her fictional family were just too extraordinary for realism. And yet the novel dealt with subjects that many would say were too serious for comedy. And the funny thing is, those serious portions were really beautifully written. So it was jolting when, yet another coincidence would drop out of the clear blue sky, and I mean that literally in one part of the book. And you'd find yourself suddenly back in comic territory. There were points when I thought maybe the author was giving us a Bildungsroman, the story of Ellie's journey to being a new way of doing Ellie. But in the end, all that I can say is that she got older. Okay, so what do I really want to say about this book? I made this a sideline video because I couldn't be neutral about When God Was a Rabbit. The sheer number of unusual occurrences, timely coincidences in the novel, for me, they ceased to be amusing. At first, they just got a bit tedious, and then 331 pages. Bear in mind, it got maddening. And at page 250, I actually threw the book down in disgust. I came to a scene. Okay, imagine this. Ellie has received a letter from her longtime girlfriend, Jenny. Jenny reads tarot cards. Earn a little cash on the side. The letter is dated 7th of September, 2001, right? Everybody reading that's going to know, oh. And lo and behold, Jenny tells Ellie how extraordinary it is. She's just done a tarot reading for both of them. And in each of those 2 readings, the tower card came up. Whoa, yeah, 2 towers. Of course there are 2 towers. It's one of those moments where, you close your eyes and you count to 10 or whatever, focus on your breathing. And I say this as someone, I was nowhere near New York on the day of the World Center attacks. I didn't lose anyone on that day. I don't know anyone who lost someone. But it just seemed, okay, bear in mind, I was exhausted at this point with all these coincidences and oddities. But this seemed like such a stale, dad jokey, tasteless way to get a laugh or something. I'm assuming the New York Times reviewer was correct, and maybe Sarah Winman was attempting to be comedic. But you know what the even stranger thing? The even stranger thing was that Winman went on to write a couple of chapters where she's in New York. She's come to New York because her brother went missing in the attack, and he's presumed to be one of those lost. And that writing was so moving, because suddenly there were no coincidences, no lottery wins or all these other improbable things. There's just a person dealing with terrifying amounts of pain. They were fantastic chapters. And for those couple of chapters, or however long it was, I almost made peace with the book. Almost. Except it didn't last. And the problematic content. Well, let's talk about what it is first. There are brief past tense descriptions of domestic abuse, and that's just written in a single letter. There is one sex scene, and it's mercifully brief because it never really transcends cliche. I'm going to confess, nothing bad that happened to anyone in this novel ever felt real. Sarah Winman, she had this tendency, she would only assign walk-on parts to unpleasant characters, and she tended to keep any dark experiences off stage. That is, she'd describe them after they happened, or she'd have them show on the television news, something like that. Let's look at her afterward again, because it says something significant. She says, quote, violence, and therefore the senselessness of violence, is also a theme that punctuates the book. Well, okay, punctuates is a good choice of verb, but not for the reasons Sarah Winman may think. Her references to current events, they were dropped into Ellie's memoir like these single grains of salt. They provided me with no sense of the thematic. I saw them as deliberately placed markers so that I could orient myself in time. Okay, now I know it's this year because John Lennon has died. Now I know it's this year because it's the Brixton riots, etc., etc. The characters' lives were never convincingly tied to any of these violent moments, with one exception, and of course you know what that is already, and that was so exceptional. You probably guessed what I'm going to say now. So exceptional when you add it to all the statistically improbable stuff that had already happened to Ellie's family. I'm sorry, but I failed to discern any unifying theme in this novel simply because the story isn't pegged down firmly in credible reality. And it didn't help that, the family spent most of their life in this idyllic corner of Cornwall, cushioned with lottery-winning amounts of money. You just knew then that all the social and economic upheavals in Britain during the 80s and 90s would have had absolutely no impact on them. You know that question that I have in fiction reviews, what is the context or purpose of the problematic content? Well, purpose is a really good subject to raise here. The back cover write-up for When God Was a Rabbit, it says, quote, this is a book about childhood and growing up, friendships and families, triumph and tragedy, and everything in between. Yeah, well said. Well said. This book felt like it just attempted too much. It was trying to cram in such a panorama of experience, trying to deal with the comic and the serious, and the effect of all of that mushed together was it was diminishing. I felt, while I was reading, I felt small and kind of lost and, slightly irritable. Actually, I felt as if I'd been prevented from reading anything at all. Suggestions for related follow-up reading. I'll tell you what I need after Sarah Winman's novel. I either need a piece of fiction with better comic timing and proportion, or I need something that isn't comic at all. And so I asked the person who watches television, because he'd been hearing all my woes, and he gave me Harlan Coben's The Innocent. And I admire Harlan Coben because he always has tight plots, good pacing, and I can never second guess him. I can never figure out the ending before I get there. So I'm very relieved and pleased to say that we will be reviewing that next time, okay? Thanks for checking out this review, everybody. I hope your reading luck is way better than mine, okay? Take care. Bye-bye.